everybody, it is the Dark Conservatarian, and it literally is dark right now. As I just woke up very early in the morning to go to the gym, and now I'm on my way to get some breakfast and then off to work right after that. And I thought I'd do this a little political car rant, vlog, video, whatever. And so to ask the question of what is political? Well, quite frankly, practically everything, in all honesty. And I know that can be a little bit of a hot take to a select group of people, as I've been kind of criticized of saying that practically everything is political, or using the term political in what they deem to be an incorrect manner. And one of the main crux of the argument is that said party doesn't really want, it is saying that government is like inherently required for some to be political. And I don't really agree with that. Like, I searched up the definition of political, or politics more specifically, and as I read up on Merriam-Webster, and I know that Merriam-Webster has been kind of degrading their own credibility as of recently, but all the same, I'm just at least using it as a baseline anyways. And even if like the official definition that's typically used, the word political, I mean, is within the workings of government, that's basically the definition working with a political, there's still like at least a colloquial use of the word political, I would say, at least. If not, that is like by definition what it could be, because some words do have more than just one definition. Let's keep in mind, people, like for example the word capitalist. The first definition is somebody that privately owns the means of production, and so on and so forth. And then there's a second definition of capitalist, being that somebody who believes in capitalism, who favors capitalism as an economic system. And so I would say the same thing with political, the word politics as well, as Merriam-Webster had some definitions aside from the primary definition that does, yes, withhold within the workings of government, but the other definitions, not really. They have some multiple other definitions that they cite of the word politics that isn't requiring of a government for, politics to exist. If I'm making any sense right now. And for me to kind of explain what I'm meaning by that, of something being political despite whether or not government might be involved with a given issue. But first, I guess I ought to mention the pandemic, the lockdown first, because Foamy the Squirrel, y'all know that I've made a response video to him and talking about the pandemic and the lockdowns that the government has been doing in response to the beer virus, the unholy, unallowed to mention beer virus. He said this has nothing to do with politics, when really that couldn't be further from the truth, because a whole lot of people are proposing legislation, policy, a lot of politicians, and even average Joe citizens, not just politicians, are proposing policy and legislation and so forth, or advocating at least policy and legislation of where that government starts mandating people to do XYZ, be it wear a mask, shut down a business, not attend a certain event, so on and so forth. So the moment that you start instituting legislation on an issue, that is by default when it does become political. Like it or not, a political neutral centrists that don't hardly like to talk about politics, you're still getting political the moment that you start advocating for a given policy in a certain issue. But even outside of the advocacy for policy, I would argue that veganism is a prime example of something that is political despite whether or not that government gets involved. I mean, Vegan Gains and Ask Yourself, I think I've heard them both say before, like in their debate against Andy and Chris Worski in that vegan debate. And yeah, sad to say that Andy Worski has privated everything on his channel. Well, almost everything, except for the stuff that he's made like within the recent half a year or something like that. But I digress. His veganism debate, though, against Vegan Gains, he privated that, sadly enough. But anyway, back to the debate. In that debate, if I remember correctly, Vegan Gains and Ask Yourself, they said that they don't want to advocate any policy banning people from eating meat necessarily. So that basically just tells me that vegans, all they want to do is basically moral fag about veganism and animal rights and so forth. They don't really want to stop what they perceive to be inherently, abhorrently immoral in any sort of forceful way. They just want to talk about it and kind of guilt trip people over it, which I guess that makes me a little bit less on edge about vegans in general, the fact that they don't want to advocate policy on it. But even though that they don't advocate for policy, I still say that it's technically, at least by the colloquial sense, political, because there's an intense argument, intense debate over the ethics of eating meat and killing animals, nonetheless. And I guess that's one that I should start explaining of what I view to be political outside of government workings and government legislation. I say that something becomes political the moment that there is intense, heated, mass-scale debate over an issue, like or argument, not just debate, but argument over a given subject. And an argument can be had over something that isn't over politics or grand social issues and stuff like that. Like, for example, of husband and wife getting in arguments with each other. That can get heated, but it's over like subjective, case-by-case basis subjects as to what each, married couple goes arguing over. So I wouldn't consider that as technically to be really that much political, because of the fact that their issues, their individualistic issues, are not so mass scale. Their issues only pertain to them as a couple and even as a family unit a lot of times. But something like veganism, that's pretty mass scale and pretty passionately and heatedly debated over. And another example of this would be video games, feminism and video games. Like, despite how much we all want to complain about SJWs and intersectional feminists, third wave feminists, the Anita Sarkeesians and Riley Dennises of the world, at least they don't want to advocate for any policy banning people from, sexualizing women in video games or anything else like that. Kudos to them at least on that. But all the same, even though they don't want legislation to get involved in video games, I still say that it's political with them. The fact that they be so passionately arguing over this subject, and then all of us, all the rest of us people are like, just shut up, leave us alone to our games. It ain't a big deal. Oh no, we're not a bunch of sexists who view women as property or whatever the fuck else have you, just because we like good-looking women in our video games, that kind of stuff. And so that's the second example. The third example that I'll bring up of a issue that is rather passionately political, despite whether or not people want to advocate for policy on it, is Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars. Like, before the sequel trilogy was released, there wasn't any mass-scale, massive debate over it. Like, everybody pretty much agreed that the original trilogy was the best, prequel trilogy wasn't as good. I mean, yeah, there's like there's some people out there, honestly, that do believe that the prequel trilogy is better than the original trilogy. Me, I don't quite think so. I think it's kind of evenly split, at least how I personally like the two trilogies anyways. But I digress. There's those few people who believe that the prequels are better than the original, but the general consensus goes, there was a general consensus that the prequels are worse than the originals, whether or not people actually like the prequels. But now, ever since the releasing of the sequel trilogy, there's a massive debate on whether or not the sequel trilogy is any good at all. There's not a real general consensus. It's like almost evenly split in the Star Wars fan base as to whether or not Star Wars 7, 8, and even 9 for that matter are any good. And whether or not, and aside from the quality, the pure aspect of the quality of the videos of the movies themselves, there's also the whole sexism and racism side of the whole debate that gets put into play as well. So I would argue that Star Wars pretty political ever since the releasing of the sequel trilogy. Let's be honest, folks. You cannot hardly comfortably talk about the sequel trilogy without getting in a very heated argument about it. I'm not gonna lie, I got in a few heated arguments about the sequel trilogy myself, whether or not it's any good. Prequel trilogy, not so much, but even because of the release of the sequel trilogy, I would say that the prequel trilogy, the general consensus of the prequel trilogy has become a little bit more heated. Maybe it's because some people look at the sequel trilogy and they go giving a second thought to the prequel trilogy and thinking, maybe the prequels weren't so bad. But then again, there are some people out there who like the prequel trilogy all their lives nonetheless. Like I, for example, I like the prequel trilogy, generally speaking anyways, even before the release of the sequel trilogy, even though that I know it has its flaws. But anyway, I'm getting way off track. So yeah, I would say that the word political, and even when it comes to like, I guess I should like address this as well. Another criticism that I get is like when I go saying that anarchy and anarchism is political, that's a political subject. And anarchists will come in response saying, no, not really, because politics has to do with government. We don't want government to exist. I would still say it's kind of political because of the massive heated debate that is over, like what I said a little bit earlier in my criteria of the word political. Even if there's actually a fourth example that I want to bring up as far as political goes. Like there's a commercial that I sometimes hear on the radio of my music station anyways, of where a person is all like, try to ignore the office politics, and what do you think of when somebody says office politics? They don't think like literal government workings. It's not like that there's a literal governmental system inside a regular privately owned business, in the office of a privately owned business. It's more like drama. They're using the word political kind of colloquially, but all the same, yeah. Even if the official definition, so in closing, I guess even if the official definition of politics has more to pertain to government than anything else, I would still say that, at least colloquially, that practically everything in the world is political. So that's all I have to say. I have to go in and get my breakfast, get on with my day before I become late for work. And so tell me what you all think. What do you think of the word political? How much of given day-to-day subjects is political to you? And do you think that anarchism is technically political, even though that there is no government wanted by anarchists at all? Would you say that the issues of feminism, veganism, Star Wars, video games, that's all political, even if there might be some people that say they don't want to, or even most people in the arguing of said subjects that don't want legislation done with those subjects? Tell me what you think in the comment section. Hope to see you all later. I'm the Dark Conservatarian. God bless and goodbye.